Hello everyone, my name is Beatrice and I'd like to welcome you all to our very first make-believe mini-story. The stories in this brand new series are inspired by the roll of the dice. For this one we have used Rory's story dice, but you can use any story dice you'd like. You can even make your own by giving the numbers on a regular dice corresponding images. Your story that you come up with will depend on what the images mean to you and in what order you use them. Anything can happen in a story if you use your imagination. Now for these stories, we will enter the land of make-believe in the traditional way by using Once Upon a Time. Without any further ado, I give you the wand that worked. Once upon a time, there was a boy called James. He lived with his mum on the 7th floor of a tall block of flats on the edge of the city. It was Wednesday morning and James was sitting at the end of a row of children, all waiting to find out if they had a part in the school play. Miss Willis was reading out names from a clipboard. James looked nervously along the row and the boy next to him smiled. "I'm Billy," he said. "I'm James," James replied. "Which part did you go for?" Billy asked. "The crook," James said. "Oh, that's a good one," Billy said. "Billy Hedges, you will play the wizard." Billy's eyes lit up and he jumped up. "Go and see Mr. Hawkett for your costume." "James Burrows, you will play the crook." James smiled and raced after Billy to get his costume. Backstage, there were children everywhere pulling at clothes and trying on hats and swords and aprons and wigs. James found Billy half inside a large trunk labelled props. He was already wearing the wizard's cloak, which was bright purple and covered in silver stars. As James approached, Billy fell out of the box clutching a magician's wand. It was a thin, black stick with the tip painted white, just like the ones on TV magic shows. Billy stood up. "What do you think?" he asked, holding his arms out. "I think it's a bit big," James laughed. Billy looked down. The cloak pulled around his feet. He grinned up at James. "That's okay. I'll fix it with magic," he said. He pointed the wand at the cloak and commanded, "Cloak, shrink to fit." The two boys were astonished to see a tiny blue spark pop from the wand and land onto the cloak. They stood there blinking at the floor where the excess fabric had been. The cloak was now a perfect fit, but neither of them actually saw it shrink. "It's real?" James asked in astonishment. Billy quickly looked around, then tucked the wand into the waistband of his trousers. "We can't tell anyone," he said. But they had been seen. "Let's go to my block," James said. "There's a staircase out onto the roof. Nobody ever goes up there except for me." James and Billy raced up the 10 flights of steps to the roof. James picked up a handful of gravel and lined the little stones. Billy pointed the wand at the first one. "Stone into stick," he said. There was a pop of blue light from the wand again, and where there had been a stone, there now lay a stick. The boys stared at each other. "This is amazing," Billy said. James frowned. "It could be terrible, though. Imagine if the wrong person had found it." Just then, the roof door crashed open, and filling the doorway was Mr. Hawkett, the grumpy deputy headmaster. His eyes were bulging as he looked at the wand in Billy's hand. "Give me that, boy!" he shouted and lunged at Billy. Billy dodged him, but he was quick to turn on them and block the doorway. The two boys backed towards the edge of the roof. "What now?" James asked. Billy looked wildly around, then glanced over his shoulder at the rows of tiny cars in the car park below them. "Jump!" he whispered. He took hold of James's hand, and the two boys leapt from the building. Billy shouted something that James couldn't hear above the wind in his ears. There was a flash of light, and moments later, 2 stag beetles landed on the tarmac next to the wand. The end. Why don't you see if you can come up with a completely different story using the same 6 images that we used for our story? Remember, you don't have to use them all in the same order, and the images may mean something completely different to you than they meant for us. For example, in our story, the masks were the school play, but in your story, they may be a spooky abandoned theatre. Give it a go, and we'll see you next time.